Just over an hour ago at CPAC, Mike Pence proved once again that he is the most dangerous person in the world for Donald Trump. And earlier today, on that same stage, Steve Bannon proved to the world that he is the most powerful person in the White House right now, including the president. Mike Pence thrilled the right-wing Republican audience tonight in ways Donald Trump never could. He did it without ever mentioning banning Muslims. He did it without ever mentioning building a wall on the southern border. He did it the old-fashioned way, not by sounding like Donald Trump, but by sounding like Ronald Reagan as much as he possibly could. He spoke in awe about the Bible that he used for his swearing in as vice president. His reverence for that Bible was completely believable to a Republican audience that knows Donald Trump has no reverence for anything. And Mike Pence's reverence for that Bible was split between what he believes is the divine wisdom therein and the fact that Ronald Reagan used that very same Bible for his swearing in as president. That Bible got a big cheer tonight in Mike Pence's speech. Mike Pence repeatedly brought the audience to their feet in standing ovations, and he closed with some of that old-time religion that Donald Trump could never deliver, and I do mean literally religion.
We need one more thing, if you're inclined. We need your prayers.
If for some reason Mike Pence has to replace Donald Trump in the presidency, that audience tonight would not miss Trump for a day. And since this is an administration already under FBI investigation, speculation about impeachment is already in the air. And because Donald Trump continues to appear unhinged in public, psychiatrists continue to call for his removal from the presidency using a provision of the 25th Amendment that can only be activated by the vice president. A provision that allows the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to install the vice president as the acting president whenever they believe the president is incapable of fulfilling his duties as president. And a new poll shows Mike Pence more popular than Donald Trump. None of that is good for Donald Trump. Earlier in the day at CPAC, Steve Bannon made it clear that he knows he is the most powerful man in the White House, and he made it clear that Donald Trump knows that too. We have never seen anyone this powerful in the White House who was not the President of the United States. Karl Rove was often referred to as Bush's brain, much to the irritation of George W. Bush, who graduated from Yale College and Harvard Business School without any help from Karl Rove. Compared to Steve Bannon's job, the likes of which has never previously existed in a White House, Karl Rove's role was relatively minor. Karl Rove had nothing to do with foreign policy in the Bush White House. He had nothing to do with war policy in Afghanistan and Iraq. He had very little influence over domestic policy. Karl Rove's job was simply to publicly spin the policy decisions made by others. Karl Rove had no voice in the writing of the Bush tax cuts into law. That was done by the Bush team at the Treasury and Republicans in the House and the Senate. Karl Rove's job was to spin the fantasy that the Bush tax cuts would not plunge the United States deeper and deeper into debt, which of course they did. Vice President Dick Cheney was commonly thought to control President Bush's thinking on war policy, but no one ever argued that Dick Cheney had anything important to say about domestic policy. No one cared what Dick Cheney was thinking about tax cuts or the Medicare prescription drug plan or any other domestic policy. And we now know that there were some significant disagreements between President Bush and Dick Cheney in which the vice president was on the losing end of the argument. So no, there has never been anyone like Steve Bannon in the White House, and he proved that today at his public appearance at CPAC, sitting beside the White House Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus. And he proved it without saying a word. Steve Bannon spoke, but the words didn't matter. In Trump world, image is everything. Everything. And that is the singular point of convergence between Trump world and Washington. Image. Image is important in Washington, and that is why Washington, D.C. is the least interesting fashion center in the United States. Everyone wants to look like Mitch McConnell or a law professor. In other words, everyone wants to look serious, deeply serious. Everyone wants to look camera ready for their Senate confirmation hearings every minute of the day, except Steve Bannon. Imagine someone showing up for a Supreme Court confirmation hearing looking like that. Secretary of State? Now, Rex Tillerson might look like that on a Sunday afternoon, but he's never going to let us see him look like that because Rex Tillerson needs you to believe that he is a deeply serious man doing a serious job. Everyone outside of the Washington cult is likely to make the same mistake looking at Steve Bannon, the mistake of thinking that you're looking at someone who doesn't care about what he looks like, just doesn't care about his appearance. But inside the Washington cult, everyone knows you're looking at someone who cares about his appearance more than anyone in Washington, and that is why he refuses to submit to the conventions of dress and appearance in Washington. Steve Bannon is not the first very powerful staff person in Washington who has toyed with the conventions of appearance just to show how powerful he is. But no one has so completely defied those conventions as Steve Bannon. And it is an even more powerful statement than ever because it is being made in the Trump White House, the most image-conscious White House in history. Axios reports that the president was not happy with Sean Spicer's physical appearance the first time he entered the White House briefing room. Here's what a source close to Trump told Axios about Spicer. It'd be one thing to wear a pinstripe that fit him perfectly, but it was like he had a gap in his collar. See that gap in the collar of his suit coat right behind the blue collar of his shirt? He had a gap in his collar, and this person said, "Oh God, he's going to get reamed. I was getting text messages. Can you believe what he's wearing? 4 people texted me because we know the boss. Trump is very much about present yourself in the best light if you're going to represent him, even more so." Except, of course, for the most powerful person in the White House, Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon was representing the president today at CPAC, and he broke the Trump rules because he is more powerful than the Trump rules. Axios reports Trump pays close attention to ties, says a source who has worked with Trump. You're always supposed to wear a tie. If it's not a Trump tie, you can get away with Brooks Brothers, but I'd suggest Armani. Now there's Reince Priebus obeying the Trump rules, and there's Steve Bannon, who obviously lives above the Trump rules and who obviously very much wants you and the world to know that. Now let's match Steve Bannon's power with Donald Trump's brain, the brain that psychiatrists are increasingly publicly worried about. We will discuss President Trump's mental health with a psychiatrist later in the hour, but for the moment, let's just consider his knowledge, just his knowledge. What does Donald Trump know about government? He has proved time and time again throughout the campaign and during his presidency that the answer to that is absolutely nothing. Nothing. He is operating at an ignorance level never seen before in the presidency. He had to call one of his advisors in the middle of the night recently to ask, what is a strong dollar? What is a weak dollar? And which one is good for America? In that empty section of Donald Trump's brain that should be occupied by knowledge and opinions about governing policy lives Steve Bannon. Virtually everything that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth about policy and foreign and domestic is a version of what he has been told by Steve Bannon. The president's dark anti-American inaugural address came from Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon has more power than any White House staffer has ever had, but it is a power that is now in direct conflict with some members of the Trump cabinet. Those people who, along with the vice president, have the power to remove the president in favor of the acting president. While Steve Bannon was preaching to the converted at CPAC today, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was in Mexico appearing with the Mexican foreign minister who publicly complained about Trump-Bannon policies affecting Mexico, and the Secretary of State did not speak one public word of defense of the Trump-Bannon policies. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos reportedly disagrees with the Trump-Bannon position on rolling back protections for transgender students. People like Steve Bannon, who spend their lives attacking government, always think that governing is easy until they get inside the government. And now Steve Bannon has discovered that the unconstitutional executive order on immigration that he so foolishly co-authored has been killed by judges more powerful than Steve Bannon, more powerful than the president. And although the Trump-Bannon presidency insists that the situation at our borders is an emergency, the White House continues to struggle and fail to come up with a rewrite of that executive order. Sean Spicer sunk into bureaucratic doublespeak today at the White House briefing, trying to explain the delay in coming up with that emergency executive order. Steve Bannon is, without a doubt, the most powerful person in the Trump White House, including the president. But the question tonight is, how much failure is Donald Trump willing to suffer under Steve Bannon's guidance? How low do Donald Trump's poll numbers have to go before Steve Bannon's supervision of Donald Trump has to go? Joining us now, David Corn, Washington Bureau Chief for Mother Jones and an MSNBC political analyst. Also with us, Christopher Dickey, foreign editor for The Daily Beast and an MSNBC contributor. And Christopher, it's great to have you here in New York. And you always bring us the European perspective, where you spend your life. What do they think they're watching as they watch this from Europe?
Well, last week during the Munich conference on security, you really had a sense that they felt they were looking at a Jekyll and Hyde administration. That on the one hand, you've got these reasonable people, what the rationals as they're called in Europe, like Pence, like Secretary Tillerson, like Secretary Mattis. These people are people who know how government works, who know what they're doing, they know how Europe works, they know how the world works. And then you've got the radicals, the Bannon faction, which is like Mr. Hyde, who are really interested in just feeding their own egos, feeding their own impulses, really. And that sense that you have this impulsive president is something that scares the hell out of the Europeans.
That question that we heard from Europe to Pence last week, who should we listen to, you or the president? Is that the essential question in Europe after Mike Pence's tour?
Well, absolutely. Not just Mike Pence, but the many other people in the cabinet were there. Mattis was there, Kelly was there, Tillerson was running around Europe. And yes, absolutely. They were like, who do we listen to? Who's running the show here? Where do we go from here? Because remember, Europe is at play right now. NATO is threatened in a lot of different ways. You've got Trumpistas like Marine Le Pen in France and Geert Wilders in the Netherlands who are threatening to tear apart the European Union. So the whole establishment in Europe is saying we need some leadership, and we can't turn to the United States for it. What are we going to do?
David Corn, at CPAC today, Steve Bannon guaranteed everyone there that the situation with the news media was going to get worse. And of course, he said that because they will continue all of their great successes, none of which they've actually achieved yet, and that the news media then will become more and more angry. And so, in a way, he is predicting for the president things will get worse, the noise will get worse, and maybe even your poll numbers might get worse because, of course, the polls are all fake. And so he seems to be kind of predicting turbulence for the president, so the president won't then look at Steve Bannon a few weeks and months from now and say, hey, what's with all this turbulence we're in the middle of?
Well, let me take issue for a moment with what Chris just said, and I have, tremendous respect for him, in that I don't think what Steve Bannon is doing is just impulsive. I do think he has a plan. I do think it's to be disruptive. I think it is to break, to sort of, make alliances with nationalist movements overseas. And he goes to Germany, and he's not interested in making nice with Angela Merkel or others. He's there to sort of deal with others who want to sort of see Europe break apart and have this sort of counter movement towards diversity, towards immigration, towards accepting refugees. And I think he sees Russia as an ally in that effort, all part of this war, the civilizational clash against Islam. And today at CPAC, he essentially said that that he's a revolutionary, and that he's out to bust up the government here and to deal with globalism and media elites and others. And I think he tells Donald Trump every day, this is our mission, and it's going to get nasty because you're going after some big targets who Trump already has a bias against. He's always had a thing about the media. And so I think Bannon is trying to reinforce this notion that we're going to do this, we're going to change the world, you're going to be a historic figure, but the price is you're going to get a lot of slings and arrows from those sleazy scumbag, folks in the media who are the enemy of the American people. That's where Trump is getting this. So right now, I wouldn't worry so much about Trump turning on Bannon. I think it's going to take a long while for that alliance, that intellectual alliance, to fall apart.
Well, I think two things. First, David's right. I don't think Bannon is impulsive. I think the president is impulsive.
Yeah.
And I think that's visible every time he gets up in public.
Yeah.
I think that's well known. No, Bannon is a terrible snob. He didn't say he was going to bust up the government. He was talking about the deconstruction of the administrative state. Deconstruction is a word he got from Jacques Derrida, the French philosopher, who's known for his criticism of modern philosophy. That's typical Bannon. See how smart I am? Who's going to catch this? Deconstruction. I bet people at CPAC weren't tuned into that word, but anybody in France would hear it, and they would see that this is a guy who not only is powerful, but he reeks of the arrogance of power, intellectual arrogance. And I think that Trump is impressed by him. I think Trump looks at him and listens to this and says, wow.
Does Steve Bannon have an image yet in Europe? Has his image crossed the ocean yet?
Oh, it's very negative.
So what do they think when they see the guy who looks like he slept in the subway last night and he's the one who's talking to the president?
They think he looks like what they call an SDF, someone without a fixed home. They look at him and they say, who is this slob, this guy schlumping around, who at the same time is trying to interfere in French politics? You know, he really is a sinister guy, even in French politics, even when it comes to Marine Le Pen. He said he really is supportive of the Le Pens, meaning the whole family, not Marine Le Pen, and he singled out Marion Maréchal Le Pen, who's in her 20s, long blonde hair, very pretty, and all you could think when the French press was running the picture of him and the picture of her was dirty old man.
Well, his image is traveling. David Corn, Christopher Dickey, thank you both for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.